I meant to do a video on this subject before, and I guess timing's everything, but if you guys aren't aware, Arizona really disenfranchised a lot of people, both Republicans and Democrats, but more so Democrats than Republicans. And the reason I'll say this is basically Arizona decided to go from 200 polling places within its largest county, which is the Maricopa County, which encompasses Phoenix and all of its suburbs. It went from 200 polling places to basically 80. So what it ended up doing is it caused each polling place to have to service approximately 125,000 voters. Now, there's no way in hell a single polling place is going to be able to handle 125,000 voters in a limited period of time. I believe it was 12 hours, without there being substantially long lines. And the other thing that they did was, excuse me, when people registered to vote, if they registered to vote as a Democrat or even a Republican, and the computer records were wrong, which happened a lot, especially for Democrats, they were not allowed to specifically vote. They were given provisional ballots, and we all know they never count those damn provisional ballots. So anyway, this is just a quick blip on that particular subject.
Of Arizona. I think voters in Arizona really gave us a textbook look at what the post-Voting Rights Act world could look like. Look at that map. That is the number of polling locations that were available to primary voters in 2012 versus 2016. Jonathan, the woman Helen Purcell, who's a Maricopa County recorder, took responsibility for what happened. But is this a good reason for Democrats to maybe start talking about the Voting Rights Act?
Okay, so Bernie Sanders really got screwed in this. And let me tell you why. The majority of voters who cast their votes early or via the mail, absentee ballots, those are older people. Now, I don't know if the majority of those voters were Republicans or Democrats, but I know the majority of them were all older people, which would have favored, on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton. And to be honest with you, I'm not really sure who they would have favored on the Republican side. But on the day of the election, I know that Democrats and Republicans were really, really, really disenfranchised with having to wait. Now, younger people aren't going to have the patience of older people, because older people, a lot of them aren't working, so they can afford to take the time to stand online for 3, 4, 5 hours. But younger people basically are working people, and they can't take that kind of time. And they really were reporting that like thousands of people were basically just leaving the lines in order to go to work. And there was a news clip, which I don't have, unfortunately, where you had poll workers that were walking up and down the lines and telling the people how long, how much time they were going to have to spend on that line before they could vote. And you could just see the younger people were just getting off the lines and going about their business, going to work or doing whatever else they had to do. So, this really hurt the younger voters, which are primarily on the Democratic side going to be Bernie Sanders voters. And on the Republican side, to be honest with you, I don't know which side it hurt more. Probably, it probably hurt Trump more, because I believe he probably would have had even more voters on his side.
Yes, it is. And here's the thing. Democrats have been talking about the Voting Rights Act since the last election, when all those states rushed to put in voting restrictions just before the 2012 election. My hope is that not just Democrats are talking about it, and by that I mean Democratic leaders and elected officials, but that Democratic voters will realize that there are forces out there that are trying to restrict their access to the ballot box, and by restricting the access to the ballot box, could shift the election. So if they were willing to stand in line, as we're seeing there in the video, for hours to vote for the re-election of Barack Obama, then they definitely need to come out and stand in line for hours to cast their vote for a Democrat, because that is the only way that a Democrat will win in November.
Yeah, and to coming out to the table, are the Democratic candidates, both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, making a mistake not talking more about the Voting Rights Act?
Absolutely. So they're just being distracted, and this is a key way that, if they want to run away from the sort of polarizing conversation about Black Lives Matter, which I think is a mistake, this is still a safe but important racial justice issue. The Democrats can't win without a young voter base and without all of the folks who use expanded polling times and expanded polling locations.
And last, then to you, Chloe, on the issue of now women becoming front and center in the Republican campaign, how much of a setback are we talking about in this discussion?
I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier. I think it's masculinity that is becoming front and center in the Republican campaign. And what's so frustrating is that on the left, you have people talking about how is Hillary Clinton's gender affecting how she's running and her resonance with voters.
All right, so anyway, I'm going to stop it there. But this is, this in the South is primarily a black issue, but as you see in Arizona, this is not just a black issue in Arizona. This is a voting rights issue, period, which affects black and white people, and basically affects can affect the nomination of whichever candidate that you're pulling for, and in particular Bernie Sanders, because I believe it was his voters that were standing on those lines and actually walked away, from those lines.